What would you do if your family called you a failure for 30 years until your sister's fiancé looked across the dinner table and asked, "Wait, you're the CEO. We're paying $200 million to..." This is that story. They said I failed. That's what my family told everyone who asked about me. The daughter who dropped out of law school, the one who disappeared into her computer for years, the black sheep who never quite fit the mold of our perfect Connecticut family. Picture this 30 years old sitting at family dinners, where conversations flow around you like you're not even there, where your accomplishments are met with polite smiles and quick subject changes, where your very existence feels like an apology your parents have to make. My father is Dr. Richard Carter, one of the state's most respected cardiologists, the kind of man who saves lives before breakfast and has hospital wings named after him. My mother sits on the state Supreme Court, making decisions that shape Connecticut law. Their power couple goals, the kind of people who get invited to governors' mansions and charity galas. My younger sister, Mia, she's everything I never was. Beautiful, charming, brilliant in all the ways that matter to our parents. Pre-med at Yale, top of her class, dating the right people, saying the right things. The daughter they actually wanted. And me? I was the disappointment. The one who chose computers over courtrooms. The one who turned down law school for some vague technology career that nobody understood. The daughter they stopped mentioning at dinner parties because explaining what I did was too complicated and, frankly, too embarrassing. For years, I watched them light up when people asked about Mia. Oh, she's going to be a surgeon just like her father. But when the conversation turned to me, their smiles would tighten. Hannah's exploring different opportunities. You know how young people are these days. Translation: we don't know what she's doing and we're not sure we want to. But here's the thing about being invisible in your own family. Nobody really pays attention to what you're actually doing. They're too busy being embarrassed by what they think you're not doing. They see the surface, the late nights at the computer, the casual clothes, the lack of traditional milestones, like medical degrees or law partnerships. They never see the rest. So when my sister announced her engagement to Ethan Brooks 6 months ago, I was genuinely happy for her. He seemed like a good guy, successful, works at some big healthcare tech company called Horizon Health. Harvard MBA corner office, the kind of man my parents could brag about at the country club without having to explain anything. I figured I'd play my usual role at their engagement dinner. Sit quietly at whatever table they'd assigned me to smile when appropriate, make small talk with the relatives nobody else wanted to deal with, and slip out early like I always do. Just another family gathering where I'd blend into the background while everyone celebrated the golden child. I had no idea that this dinner would be different. I had no idea that the man my sister was marrying held the key to shattering everything my family believed about me. Because when Ethan looked across that table at me that night, his eyes went wide. Not with recognition, but with shock. With complete and utter disbelief. And then he said the 5 words that would change everything forever. "Wait, you're the CEO." To understand how we got to that moment, you need to know what it was like growing up as Hannah Carter in a family where excellence wasn't just expected, it was the baseline for acknowledgement. Picture this Sunday dinners that felt more like performance reviews than family meals. The dining room with its mahogany table that seated 12 crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier Mom had imported from Italy, and conversations that were carefully orchestrated displays of achievement. Dad would sit at the head of the table, still in his surgical scrubs half the time, and quiz Mia about her pre-med courses, while Mom beamed with pride. They'd discuss Mia's volunteer work at the Children's Hospital, her debate team victories, her perfect GPA, her research internship that was apparently going to revolutionize pediatric cardiology. Every Sunday, without fail, it was the Mia show. And honestly, she deserved it. My sister is genuinely brilliant, genuinely kind, genuinely everything parents dream of when they imagine their perfect child. And me, I'd sit there picking at my food, counting the minutes until I could escape back to my room, waiting for someone to ask about my day. But they never did, because In their world, if you weren't following the path, they'd laid out the path that led to medical school or law school or some other respectable profession. They could explain at cocktail parties you simply didn't exist. It wasn't malicious. That's what made it so much worse. They weren't actively trying to hurt me. I was just irrelevant to their vision of what success looked like. I was 14 when I taught myself to code. Not because anyone encouraged me, but because I was lonely. Really desperately lonely. While other kids my age were going to sleepovers and school dances, I was spending Friday nights in my room learning Python from YouTube videos and building websites that nobody would ever see. My computer became my escape, my friend, my entire world, while Mia was winning spelling bees in student council elections and basically collecting achievements like they were Pokemon cards. I was diving into algorithms that most adults couldn't understand, building programs that solved problems I didn't even know existed yet. But here's the thing about being the invisible child. Your victories are invisible too. I remember the night I stayed up until 3 a.m. finishing my first real program. I was 15, and I'd built this tool that could organize medical records and flag potential drug interactions. It was rough, sure, but it worked. It actually worked. I was so proud, so excited, practically vibrating with the need to share this breakthrough with someone. I ran downstairs the next morning, laptop in hand, ready to show my parents what I'd created. Mom was rushing around the kitchen, packing Mia's lunch and reviewing her schedule for student government meetings. Dad was at the table reading through patient files while eating cereal. "Dad, Mom, look at this," I said, practically bouncing with excitement. "I built this program that can help doctors avoid prescribing dangerous drug combinations." Dad barely looked up from his medical journal. His response was burned into my memory forever. "That's nice, honey. Did you finish your college prep homework? Your grades in English are more important than computer games." Computer games. That's what he called it. Mom was already halfway out the door, car keys jingling. "Hannah, make sure you help your sister study for her SATs today, and don't forget to clean your room." That was it. My first real breakthrough dismissed in 10 seconds flat. No questions about how it worked, no curiosity about what it might mean, no recognition that their 15-year-old daughter had just built something that could potentially save lives. Just homework reminders and chores. I stood there in that kitchen, holding my laptop, feeling like I just tried to share the most important thing in my world with people who spoke a completely different language. The program that had kept me up all night with excitement was nothing more than a distraction to them. That was the first crack in my heart, but it wasn't the last. High school was a masterclass in existing in someone else's shadow. Every parent-teacher conference, every school event, every family gathering became another opportunity to watch my parents glow with pride over Mia's accomplishments, while treating my achievements like interesting hobbies. I started entering coding competitions because they were the one place where what I could do actually mattered. Local contests first, then regional, then national. I'd spend weeks preparing, debugging, perfecting my solutions. And I was good. Really good. Good enough to start winning. But when I'd come home with certificates and trophies, the response was always the same polite, distant approval. "That's wonderful, dear. Now, did you hear about Mia's acceptance to the National Honor Society?" The breaking point came when I was 17. I'd entered this huge coding competition, the National High School Programming Championship. Kids from MIT and Stanford feeder schools were competing. The best young programmers in the country all gathered in Chicago for 3 days of the most intense coding challenges I'd ever seen. I'd been preparing for months, staying up late practicing algorithms, studying every problem set I could find online. This wasn't just another local contest. This was the big leagues, the kind of competition that could change your entire future. The problems were brutal. Multi-layered challenges that required not just coding skills, but mathematical reasoning, logical thinking, and the ability to work under pressure that would break most people. I remember sitting in that hotel ballroom surrounded by kids who'd been coding since they were 5, feeling completely out of my league. But something clicked. All those lonely nights in my room, all those hours of self-taught programming, all that time I'd spent building things nobody cared about. Suddenly, it all came together. I solved problems that had stumped kids from the best prep schools in the country. I debugged code faster than programmers twice my age. And somehow, impossibly, I won. I actually won. Beat out hundreds of brilliant programmers and won a $50,000 scholarship plus guaranteed admission to MIT's computer science program. I called home immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed, tears of joy streaming down my face. This was it. This was the moment they'd finally see me, finally understand what I'd been working toward all these years. Mom, Dad, I won the whole thing. The national championship. There was this pause, not a good pause, a pause that felt like a door closing. Then Mom's voice distracted and already moving on. Oh, honey, that's wonderful, but we can't celebrate tonight. Mia made it to state finals for debate. We're driving to Hartford right now. We'll talk when we get back. They hung up. They actually hung up. I stood in that hotel room in Chicago, holding my phone, listening to the dial tone while winners around me celebrated with their families. Other kids were taking pictures, calling grandparents, posting on social media about the biggest achievement of their young lives. And I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. The award ceremony was that evening. I sat in the front row as they called my name, walked across the stage to accept a trophy that represented years of work and sacrifice, smiled for photos that no one I loved would ever see. I watched other winners hug their parents, take family pictures, celebrate the moment together. My parents were 3 hours away cheering for Mia's debate tournament. The same Mia who would probably win because she always won, because everything came easily to her in a way it never had for me. That night alone in my hotel room with my trophy and my scholarship letter, I made myself a promise. I whispered it to my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I'm going to build something so big, so undeniable that they'll have no choice but to see me. I had no idea how long that would take, or how much it would cost me, or that when the moment finally came, it would happen in the most unexpected way possible. But I meant every word. My tea changed everything. For the first time in my life, being different wasn't a liability. It was an asset. Walking onto that campus was like stepping into a parallel universe where the things that made me weird at home suddenly made me interesting, where staying up all night coding wasn't seen as antisocial behavior, but as dedication, where solving complex problems for fun wasn't a quirky hobby, but a valuable skill. The imposter syndrome hit hard at first. I'd spent so many years being told I was the disappointing daughter that I half expected someone to tap me on the shoulder and say there'd been a mistake, that the scholarship was meant for someone more deserving, someone whose parents actually believed in them. But slowly, I started to find my place, and that's where I met Lily Chen. Lily was this brilliant pre-med student who spent her free time analyzing healthcare data instead of partying like everyone else. She had this way of seeing patterns in medical information that was almost supernatural. While other pre-med students were memorizing textbooks, Lily was building spreadsheets that tracked everything from infection rates to recovery times to medication effectiveness across different demographics. Most people thought she was weird. I thought she was fascinating. We met in the most ridiculous way possible. It was my second semester, and I was having a complete breakdown in the computer lab at 2 a.m. I'd been working on this machine learning project that was supposed to predict student academic performance based on behavioral patterns. It should have been straightforward, but my algorithm kept producing results that made no sense. I was literally talking to my computer, pleading with it to work, when this voice behind me said, "You're trying to solve the wrong problem." I turned around, and there was this petite Asian girl with glasses hanging halfway down her nose looking at my code like she could read it faster than I could write it. "I'm sorry, what?" I said, wiping frustrated tears from my eyes. "Your data set," she said, pulling up a chair without being invited. You're trying to predict academic success, but you're using behavioral metrics that don't account for external factors. Family pressure, financial stress, cultural expectations. You're assuming all students start from the same baseline, but they don't. She was right. She was absolutely right. And that's how I learned that Lily Chen saw the world in ways that most people couldn't even imagine. We started hanging out, and I discovered something amazing. For the first time in my life, I had found someone who understood what it felt like to not fit the mold. Lily's parents were first-generation immigrants who'd sacrificed everything for her education. They wanted her to be a traditional doctor to follow the safe, respectable path that would justify all their years of struggle. But Lily knew she was meant for something different. She loved medicine, but she was fascinated by the data side, the patterns and systems that could improve healthcare on a massive scale. She didn't want to treat one patient at a time. She wanted to fix the problems that affected thousands of patients. My parents wanted me to follow Mia into law or medicine. Hers wanted her to become the doctor they'd dreamed of since she was 5. But we both knew we were meant for something that didn't fit into neat categories, something that didn't exist yet in the way we envisioned it. It was during one of our late-night ramen sessions that everything clicked. We'd started this tradition of meeting at this tiny noodle shop near campus every Thursday at midnight. The place was always empty except for us and a few other insomniacs, and we'd spend hours talking about everything and nothing. This particular night, Lily was telling me about her volunteer work at Massachusetts General Hospital. She'd been working in the pediatric ICU, helping with data entry and patient tracking, and she was frustrated beyond belief. "Hannah, I watched 3 different medical errors happen in 1 week," she said, stabbing her noodles with more force than necessary. All because of miscommunication between departments. A nurse didn't get updated medication orders. A lab result got lost between the testing department and the attending physician. A patient's allergy information wasn't properly flagged during a shift change. I put down my chopsticks. "That's terrifying." "It's infuriating," she continued. "The technology exists to fix this. We have systems that can track inventory in real time for retail stores apps, that can coordinate food delivery across entire cities' platforms, that manage millions of financial transactions without error. But hospitals are using systems from the Stone Age. Paper charts, fax machines, phone calls that get lost in translation." I could see the passion in her eyes, the same fire I felt when I was working on a particularly challenging piece of code. What if we built something better? And that's when Lily's face lit up in a way I'd never seen before. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we actually built something better? A platform that could connect every department in a hospital. Real-time updates, encrypted patient data, automatic alerts for critical situations. Something that makes communication errors literally impossible." We stayed in that restaurant until 4 in the morning, sketching diagrams on napkins sticky with ramen broth. Lily would describe a problem she'd witnessed, and I'd figure out how technology could solve it. She'd explain medical workflows, and I'd design systems to streamline them. By sunrise, we had the basic framework for what would eventually become MediLink. Not just the technical specifications, but the vision. This wasn't going to be another piece of medical software that doctors would hate using. This was going to be a platform so intuitive, so essential that it would become invisible. Like breathing, but for hospital communication. We talked until my voice was hoarse, and Lily's notebook was filled with diagrams that looked like battle plans. This wasn't just a business idea anymore. This was a way to save lives. But here's where things got complicated. While I was falling in love with this vision of revolutionizing healthcare, my parents had their own plans for my future. Plans that had nothing to do with what I actually wanted. The conversation happened over Thanksgiving dinner during my junior year. I was home for the break, sitting at that same mahogany table where I'd spent my childhood feeling invisible when Dad made his announcement. "Hannah, we've been thinking about your future," he said, cutting his turkey with surgical precision. "You're applying to law school, Yale, Harvard, Stanford. I've already written your recommendation letters." I nearly choked on my stuffing. "But Dad, I want to work in tech." The silence was immediate and heavy. Mom set down her wine glass and gave me that look she reserved for defendants who'd clearly lost their minds. "Tech is a phase, sweetheart," she said in her most diplomatic voice. "You need something stable, something respectable, something with a clear career path." "Like what Mia's doing," Dad added, beaming at my sister who was home from her first semester of medical school. "Medicine is a noble profession. It's about helping people, making a real difference in the world. But if you're not cut out for the sciences, law is the next best thing." I felt that familiar crushing weight, the assumption that I wasn't smart enough for medicine, combined with the dismissal of everything I was passionate about. But this time, there was something else underneath it. A quiet anger I'd never felt before. "What if I don't want to be a lawyer?" I asked. Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Hannah, you're 20 years old. You don't know what you want yet. That's why you have parents to guide you." "I know I want to build software that helps people," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mom jumped in immediately. "Sweetheart, you can't make a career out of playing with computers. What happens when you want to buy a house, start a family? You need something with security, with prestige." The word prestige hung in the air like a challenge, because that's what this was really about. Not my happiness, not my talents, not even my potential to make a difference. It was about their ability to explain my career to their friends at dinner parties. Mia, to her credit, tried to help. Maybe Hannah could do something medical related with technology, like medical research or something. But Dad was already shaking his head. "The tech industry is unstable. Companies rise and fall overnight. Look at all those dot-com failures. Hannah needs something solid, something that will still exist in 30 years. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about Lily, about our vision for Medilink, about the problems we could solve and the lives we could save. But I knew what they'd say. Computer games. A phase. Unrealistic dreams. So I smiled and nodded and let them think I was considering law school. But inside, I was making a different plan entirely. Because while my parents thought I was dutifully filling out applications to Harvard Law and Yale Law, I was actually working on something else. Something that could change everything if I was brave enough to try. The National Science Foundation had announced a healthcare innovation grant program. $50,000 for projects that could revolutionize patient care. The application was brutal, requiring not just technical specifications, but detailed business plans, market analysis, and proof of concept demonstrations. I spent 3 months perfecting that application. Lily and I worked together, combining her medical knowledge with my technical expertise to create something that read more like a manifesto than a grant proposal. We wrote about patient safety, about the lives we could save, about the revolution we could start in healthcare technology. Every night, after my parents thought I was studying for the LSATs, I was actually refining our pitch for Medilink, building prototypes, researching market size, calculating the potential impact of reducing hospital communication errors by even 10%. I submitted it on the same day. My parents thought I was sending in my Harvard Law application. They celebrated with champagne and called my grandparents to share the good news about their daughter finally getting serious about her future. I didn't tell them about the grant application. I couldn't tell them, because deep down I knew that if I failed, if this didn't work out, I'd have to face the truth that maybe they were right about me after all. Maybe I was just a girl with a computer pretending she could change the world. The waiting was torture. Every day checking my email 50 times, hoping for news that could change everything. Knowing that my entire future hung on the decision of people I'd never met, evaluating an idea that my own parents couldn't understand. 3 months later, the email came, and everything changed forever. The grant came through. $50,000 to build Medilink. When I opened that email, I screamed so loud in my dorm room that my roommate thought someone was dying. She wasn't entirely wrong. The old Hannah, the one who'd accepted being invisible, who'd believed maybe her parents were right about her limitations, that Hannah died the moment I read those words. Congratulations, your proposal has been selected for funding. But here's what they don't tell you about winning startup money, what every movie and success story conveniently glosses over. 50,000 sounds like a fortune until you realize you have to build an entire company with it. And not just any company, but one that has to meet medical industry standards, pass security audits, and convince hospitals to trust two college kids with their most sensitive data. Lily and I graduated that spring with a mixture of terror and excitement that kept us awake for weeks. While our classmates were celebrating job offers at Google and Goldman Sachs, we were frantically searching for the cheapest office space we could afford, which turned out to be a basement apartment in Somerville that smelled like mold and had pipes that banged all night like angry ghosts. Our entire office was a folding table from IKEA and 2 laptops that we'd saved up for months to buy. The walls were concrete blocks painted in institutional green that made everything look slightly sick. The only window was at ground level, so all we could see were people's feet walking by. But it was ours. And for the first time in our lives, we were building something that mattered. For the next year, we lived on ramen energy drinks and pure determination. I'm not talking about the romantic startup lifestyle you see in movies. I'm talking about wearing the same hoodie for 5 days straight, forgetting to shower because you're too deep in code to remember basic human needs, and taking turns sleeping on the couch because we couldn't afford separate apartments. The freelance work kept us alive barely. I'd spend mornings building websites for local businesses, designing logos for startups that had actual funding, fixing database problems for companies that could afford to pay consultants. 500 here, 1,000 there, just enough to cover rent and groceries, and the mounting costs of keeping Medilink alive. My typical day started at 6 a.m. with freelance work. Simple stuff that paid the bills, but didn't require much creativity. A restaurant needed an online ordering system. A law firm wanted to update their website. A nonprofit needed help with their donor database. I could code these projects in my sleep, which was good because I was basically functioning without sleep. Then afternoons and evenings were for Medilink. Every spare minute, every ounce of energy we had left after keeping ourselves financially afloat. This was where the real work happened, where we'd sit in that moldy basement and try to solve problems that had stumped teams of experienced developers at major corporations. Building software for hospitals isn't like building a social media app or an e-commerce site. Every line of code has to be perfect because people's lives depend on it. One bug, one security flaw, one moment of miscommunication, and someone could die. That weight sat on our shoulders every single day. My parents thought I'd lost my mind. During family dinners, when they asked what I was doing with my computer science degree, I'd give vague answers about consulting work and exploring opportunities. I couldn't tell them the truth because I knew exactly what they'd say. Hannah's going through another phase. I'd hear Mom whisper to Dad when they thought I couldn't hear. She'll come to her senses eventually and apply to law school like we discussed. Dad would nod gravely. It's normal for young people to rebel against practical choices. She just needs time to realize that stability matters more than passion projects. They treated my entire career like an extended adolescent rebellion, something I'd grow out of once I faced real adult responsibilities. The irony was crushing. Here I was, working 18-hour days, managing a budget, negotiating contracts, building something that could revolutionize healthcare, and they saw it as avoiding responsibility. But then something incredible happened. Boston Children's Hospital agreed to pilot our system. Getting that meeting was a miracle in itself. Lily had connected with Dr. Patricia Williams during her volunteer work, and Dr. Williams was one of those rare senior physicians who understood that technology could be medicine's greatest ally instead of its biggest headache. I'll never forget walking into that hospital for our first meeting. Lily and I in our best thrift store blazers, carrying laptops older than some of the medical residents, trying to convince seasoned doctors and hospital administrators to trust two 20-somethings from a basement in Somerville. The conference room was intimidating in that quietly expensive way that screams serious institution. Mahogany table leather chairs, walls lined with awards and certificates from medical organizations I'd only read about online. Dr. Williams sat at the head of the table with 5 other department heads, all of them looking like they had better things to do than listen to college kids pitch unproven software. But when we started the demo, something shifted. I pulled up our prototype on the projection screen, and Lily walked them through a typical day in the life of a pediatric patient. Admission lab work, medication orders, shift changes, discharge planning. At each step, she showed them how MediLink would eliminate the communication gaps that led to errors. Dr. Williams leaned forward when we demonstrated the automatic allergy alerts. "This could have prevented the medication error we had last month," she said quietly. "When can we start?" 6 months later, Boston Children's reported a 40% reduction in communication errors. 40%. We weren't just building software anymore. We were saving lives and we had the data to prove it. But success brought new problems, bigger problems that kept me awake at night staring at the ceiling of our shared apartment. Word spread through the medical community faster than we'd anticipated. Bigger hospitals wanted to pilot MediLink. Mass General called, then Johns Hopkins, then hospitals in New York, Chicago, even Los Angeles. We needed more servers, more security features, more customer support, more everything. The 50,000 was long gone, burned through on development costs and basic survival. Venture capitalists wanted to see growth metrics. We didn't have yet user bases we couldn't support, scalability plans that required resources we couldn't afford. I was working 18-hour days, living on coffee and determination, watching Lily burn out in real time as she tried to balance customer support with product development. We'd started getting inquiries from hospitals across the country, but we couldn't handle the demand. Every yes felt like a victory and a threat at the same time. The sleep deprivation was getting dangerous. I'd find myself staring at code for 20 minutes without reading a single line, or having conversations with hospital administrators where I'd completely lose track of what we were discussing. Lily started falling asleep during customer calls, her exhaustion so complete that she'd nod off mid-sentence. But the worst part wasn't the physical exhaustion. It was the psychological pressure of knowing we were onto something huge while simultaneously wondering if we were capable of handling it. Every success made the stakes higher. Every new customer made the potential for catastrophic failure more real. The irony was killing me. My family thought I was wasting my life spinning my wheels with some computer hobby while hospitals across the country were begging to use our platform. I'd get emails from department heads at prestigious medical centers praising our innovation, followed by phone calls from mom asking when I was going to get serious about my career. During Mia's graduation from medical school, the disconnect reached peak absurdity. The whole family gathered to celebrate her acceptance into a competitive residency program, and Dad pulled me aside afterward for one of his periodic interventions. "Hannah, this computer thing has gone on long enough," he said, using the tone he reserved for particularly stubborn patients. "Mia's starting her residency in the fall at one of the best hospitals in the country. Maybe you should think about following her path. It's not too late to apply to medical school if you really put your mind to it." I stood there in my sister's apartment, surrounded by congratulations, cards and flower arrangements celebrating her achievements, while my phone buzzed with messages from hospital CTOs asking about our enterprise pricing plans. The cognitive dissonance was so complete, it felt surreal. "Dad," I said carefully, "what if I told you I was already working in healthcare?" He smiled, that patient, condescending smile I'd seen 1,000 times. "Building websites isn't healthcare, honey. Mia's going to be saving lives. That's what real contribution looks like." I wanted to scream. I wanted to show him the data from Boston Children's, the testimonials from doctors who said our platform had prevented medication errors, the emails from nurses who told us we'd made their jobs safer and more efficient. I wanted to tell him that while he was proud of Mia for getting into medical school, I was building technology that was already making medical school graduates better doctors. But I didn't say anything. Because despite everything we had accomplished, despite the hospitals begging to work with us, despite the lives we were saving, I still wasn't sure we'd make it. The competition was brutal, the funding was running out, and some days I wondered if maybe Dad was right. Maybe I was just a girl with a computer pretending to change the world. The lowest point came 8 months after the Boston Children's launch. We were operating on fumes personally and financially. Our server costs were growing faster than our revenue. Customer support demands were overwhelming our tiny team, and 3 major competitors with real funding had launched similar platforms. I remember sitting in that basement office at 3 a.m. debugging a critical system failure while Lily handled an emergency call from a hospital in Portland whose entire communication system had gone down. We'd been working for 16 hours straight, living on energy drinks and stress, watching everything we'd built threaten to collapse under its own success. "Maybe we should sell," Lily said, after we'd finally fixed the Portland crisis. "Maybe we should just take whatever offer we can get and let someone else handle the scaling." I looked at her, this brilliant woman, who'd believed in our vision when nobody else would, and saw my own exhaustion reflected in her eyes. For a moment, I almost agreed. Almost accepted that we were in over our heads, that building a company was different from building software, that maybe my parents were right about the importance of stability over passion. But then, I thought about Dr. Williams at Boston Children's, about the nurses who sent us thank you emails, about the patients whose lives were safer because of what we'd built. And I realized that giving up wasn't just about us anymore. I had no idea that the biggest test was coming, and it would involve my family in ways I never could have imagined. 3 years later, everything changed. And I mean everything. MediLink had grown beyond our wildest dreams, beyond those late-night conversations over ramen, where we'd sketched impossible visions on napkins. 100 hospitals across 15 states were using our platform. From Boston Children's to Seattle Children's, from Mass General to the Mayo Clinic, we'd become the invisible infrastructure that kept hospitals communicating safely. We'd moved out of that moldy basement into a real office in Cambridge with actual windows and a coffee machine that didn't require percussive maintenance to function. We had employees now, a real team of developers and customer success managers and security specialists who knew more about healthcare than I'd ever thought possible. The numbers were staggering. Our platform processed over 50,000 patient communications daily. We'd prevented an estimated 800 medication errors in the past year alone. Hospital administrators who'd been skeptical of young founders were now calling us pioneers, visionaries, the team that had figured out what billion-dollar corporations couldn't. The press started paying attention. TechCrunch called us the healthcare communication revolution you've never heard of. Forbes mentioned the mysterious Hannah C. as one of the ghost founders changing medicine from behind the scenes. Wired did a whole piece on invisible female entrepreneurs who were reshaping entire industries without seeking the spotlight. I kept a low profile intentionally. While Lily handled press conferences and industry panels, I focused on the technology, the product development, the endless iterations that kept us ahead of our competitors. It was easier that way, more comfortable. Less chance of my family stumbling across an article and asking uncomfortable questions about my consulting work. But the recognition was validating in ways I hadn't expected. When respected medical journals started citing our research, when Harvard Business School wanted to write a case study about our growth strategy, when the National Institute of Health invited us to speak at their Digital Health Summit, it felt like vindication for every lonely night I'd spent coding in my childhood bedroom. Then, Horizon Health called. Horizon was the Google of healthcare technology, the company that other healthcare tech companies aspired to become. They'd revolutionized electronic health records, built the infrastructure that connected hospitals, nationwide created platforms that millions of healthcare workers used daily. When Horizon wanted to acquire you, it meant you'd officially made it to the big leagues. Their director of acquisitions, a guy named Ethan Brooks, scheduled a video call that would change everything. I'd researched him beforehand, of course. Harvard MBA, 10 years at McKinsey before jumping to healthcare tech, responsible for some of the biggest deals in the industry. The kind of executive who could make or break companies with a single decision. The call was supposed to last 30 minutes. We talked for 2 hours. "Ms. Carter," he said, leaning forward in his expensive office chair. "We've been watching Metalink for months. Your platform is exactly what the industry needs, and your execution has been flawless. We'd like to make an offer." The number took my breath away. $215 million. I sat in my office after that call, staring at the Boston skyline through windows that actually opened, trying to process what had just happened. 5 years ago, I was the family disappointment, the daughter who'd chosen computers over respectability. Now, I was potentially worth more money than my father had made in his entire medical career. The due diligence process was intense, like being audited by the IRS and interrogated by the FBI simultaneously. Teams of lawyers, accountants, and technical specialists descended on our office, analyzing every line of code, every financial record, every contract we'd ever signed. They wanted to understand not just what we'd built, but how we'd built it, why it worked when others had failed, and whether our success was sustainable or just lucky timing. Ethan Brooks became a constant presence in our lives, spending 12-hour days in our conference room, analyzing every aspect of Medilink with surgical precision. He understood our technology better than most of our employees, asked questions that forced us to think about our platform in new ways, and pushed us to articulate the vision that had been driving us since those first ramen-fueled conversations at MIT. He was brilliant, I had to admit, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone at his level. Most executives I'd met in the healthcare space were either former doctors who treated technology like a necessary evil, or former consultants who treated healthcare like just another market to optimize. But Ethan understood both sides could speak fluently about clinical workflows and enterprise software architecture in the same conversation. During one particularly brutal 14-hour session reviewing our security protocols, he actually ordered pizza for the entire legal team and insisted we take a break to eat like human beings instead of caffeinated robots. "You know," he said, loosening his tie and grabbing a slice of pepperoni, "most founders I work with are egomaniacs who think they invented electricity and want to explain every detail of their genius to anyone who'll listen. You and Lily are refreshingly normal. You actually listen when people suggest improvements." I laughed, surprised by his honesty. "Trust me, normal is not how my family would describe me." "Family's complicated," he said, taking a sip of the beer someone had smuggled into the conference room. "I'm actually from Connecticut too, believe it or not. Small world. I'm getting engaged to this amazing woman whose family makes mine look dysfunctional, which is saying something." I smiled politely and changed the subject back to acquisition terms. But something about that conversation stuck with me. There was something familiar about the way he talked about his fiancé, the pride in his voice when he mentioned her family. 2 weeks later, Mia called with news that made my blood run cold. "Hannah!" She practically screamed through the phone, her voice so loud I had to hold it away from my ear. "I'm engaged. Can you believe it? I'm actually engaged." I was in my office reviewing contract amendments with our legal team when her call came through. I stepped outside to take it walking to the little courtyard where we sometimes held team meetings when the weather was nice. "That's amazing, Mia. Tell me everything. Who is he? How did you meet?" "His name is Ethan Brooks, and he's absolutely perfect. He works in healthcare technology at this huge company called Horizon Health. Dad is so proud he can barely contain himself. Mom's already started planning the wedding, and they haven't even set a date yet." My heart stopped. It couldn't be the same Ethan. Connecticut was full of healthcare tech guys named Ethan, right? The odds were astronomical. There had to be dozens of Ethan Brooks working in the industry. Wrong. So completely, utterly wrong. When Mia showed me his LinkedIn profile during our video call later that day, there he was. The same face I'd been negotiating with for weeks, the same Harvard MBA credentials, the same Horizon Health title. The man who held the future of my company in his hands was going to be my brother-in-law. The cosmic joke was too perfect, too impossibly ironic to be coincidence. I'd spent years building something my family couldn't ignore, and now the person evaluating whether to pay me over $200 million was engaged to my sister. But here's the truly mind-bending part: he had absolutely no idea who I was. During our next acquisition meeting, I watched him carefully studying his face for any flicker of recognition. There was nothing. No, "wait, you look familiar" moment. No questions about my background, no curiosity about the Connecticut connection he'd mentioned weeks earlier. To him, I was just Hannah Carter, CEO of Metalink, the slightly antisocial founder who preferred technical discussions to small talk. To my family, I was still just Hannah, the daughter who'd never amounted to anything, despite her expensive education. The disconnect was surreal, like living in two parallel universes that occasionally intersected in the most bizarre ways. Here was a man who'd spent weeks analyzing my financial statements, praising my business strategy, calling me one of the smartest founders he'd worked with. And in a few months, he'd be sitting at family dinners where my parents would probably apologize for my computer phase and change the subject to Mia's medical residency applications. I realized this was it. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 17 years, though I'd never imagined it would come in such an unexpected package. Not just the acquisition, but the reckoning. The chance to finally bridge the gap between who my family thought I was and who I actually was. The negotiations intensified over the following weeks. Ethan and his team were thorough, demanding, and occasionally brutal in their assessment of our weaknesses. They wanted guarantees about customer retention projections for international expansion, detailed plans for integrating our platform with Horizon's existing products. Every meeting felt like a high-stakes performance where I had to prove that Medilink was worth the enormous sum they were considering. I'd present technical roadmaps in the morning, discuss market penetration strategies in the afternoon, and review competitive analysis late into the evening. Meanwhile, Mia was planning her engagement party, calling me every few days with updates about venues and guest lists and menu selections. She was happier than I'd ever seen her, glowing with the kind of contentment that comes from knowing your life is unfolding exactly as it should. "I can't wait for you to really get to know Ethan," she said during one of these calls. "He's so brilliant, Hannah. He really understands healthcare in a way that most business guys don't. And he's so curious about everything. He keeps asking about you, actually." My stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "Just normal brother-in-law stuff. What you do for work, what you're passionate about, whether you're dating anyone." I told him you work with computers and that you're really private about your career. He seemed to understand that some people prefer to keep their professional and personal lives separate. The irony was suffocating. Here was my future brother-in-law asking my sister about my mysterious computer career, while simultaneously evaluating whether to make me one of the wealthiest women in healthcare technology. Because Mia's engagement party was next weekend, and for the first time in my life, I was going to show up as someone they couldn't ignore, couldn't dismiss, couldn't reduce to vague explanations about computer consulting. Whether I was ready or not, it was time for both versions of Hannah Carter to finally meet. The restaurant was everything my mother loved. Expensive, impressive, and designed to make statements about the kind of family we were. The Ocean View Club overlooked Greenwich Harbor, where yacht masts swayed like a forest of privilege. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple black dress that cost more than most people's rent, but looked understated enough that no one would ask questions. Pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. I wanted to look like I belonged, but not like I was trying too hard. Old habits die hard, I suppose. The seating arrangement told the whole story. Mom had put together a chart that looked like a military operation. Mia and Ethan at the head table with my parents, of course. The important relatives, Dad's medical colleagues, Mom's judge friends, all clustered around the center. And me, table 7, with my divorced aunt who nobody talked to, my cousin who'd dropped out of college, and family friends who hadn't quite made the inner circle. I wasn't surprised. I was used to it. But for the first time in my life, it felt almost funny instead of painful, because I knew something they didn't. Dinner started with the usual performance. Dad stood up to toast our brilliant daughter Mia and her accomplished fiancé Ethan. He talked about Ethan's impressive career, his Harvard MBA, his position at one of the most prestigious healthcare technology companies in the country. Everyone applauded. Ethan smiled graciously and stood to respond. Thank you, Dr. Carter. I have to say this family has impressed me from day one. Mia is incredible, of course, but you've raised two remarkable daughters. He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on me briefly. I'm just sorry I haven't had the chance to get to know Hannah better. Mia tells me she works in technology, too. Mom jumped in quickly. Oh, Hannah's exploring different opportunities. You know how it is with young people these days. The dismissal was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired it. Almost. But then something shifted. Ethan had been looking at the place cards on our table, trying to make polite conversation with the relatives he'd been introduced to. His eyes stopped on mine. I watched his face change. First confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like shock. Wait, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet restaurant. Hannah Carter. The conversations around us started to fade. People turned to look. You're the Hannah Carter from Medilink. The silence was deafening. You could hear the clink of silverware, the distant sound of yacht engines, but no one at our table said a word. I met his eyes calmly. Yes, that's me. Ethan stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. But you're Mia's sister. You're the disappointment, I finished for him. The one who never amounted to anything. The computer girl. Mia looked between us, completely lost. I don't understand. What's Medilink? Ethan turned to her, then to my parents, then back to me. Medilink is the company we're acquiring. I've been negotiating with Hannah for weeks. We're finalizing a $200 million deal with her company. You know that moment in movies when everything goes silent and the camera zooms in on people's faces? That's exactly what happened. Except this wasn't a movie. This was my life. Dad's wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Mom's perfect composure cracked for the first time in years. Mia's eyes went wide as she stared at me like I'd just grown a second head. 200 million, Dad whispered. Hannah built the platform that's revolutionizing hospital communication. Ethan continued, still looking stunned. She's one of the most brilliant entrepreneurs I've ever worked with. Her technology is saving lives in over 100 hospitals. The relatives at table 7 suddenly looked very interested in talking to me. Cousins who'd ignored me for years were leaning forward, trying to catch my eye. Uncle Robert, who'd always called my computer interests a waste of time, cleared his throat. Well, of course, we always knew Hannah was special. Aunt Patricia nodded enthusiastically. So gifted with technology, we used to say she was ahead of her time. It was fascinating to watch. The same people who dismissed me 5 minutes earlier were now rewriting history in real time, but my parents weren't saying anything. They just sat there staring at me like I was a stranger. Finally, Mom found her voice. Hannah, why didn't you tell us And for the first time in 17 years, I had their complete attention. The next morning, my parents asked me to brunch. Not demanded. Asked. That alone told me everything had changed. We met at this little cafe in downtown Greenwich, the kind of place Mom usually avoided because it wasn't impressive enough. But I think she was finally starting to understand that impressing me might require a different approach. Dad looked like he hadn't slept. Mom kept fidgeting with her coffee cup, something I'd never seen her do in 30 years. Hannah, Dad started, we owe you an apology. Actually, I said, cutting him off gently, you don't. They both looked surprised. You raised me exactly the way you thought was best. You had a vision of success and I didn't fit it. I understand that. Mom leaned forward. But sweetheart, if we had known... That's exactly the point, I said. You would have only been proud of me if you'd known, but I needed to build something so undeniable that you couldn't diminish it. Something that would force you to see me as I actually am, not as your version of what I should be. The silence stretched between us. Finally, Dad spoke. I think I understand why you didn't tell us. And I think I think I'm proud of you for that too. It wasn't a perfect conversation. 17 years of feeling invisible doesn't get fixed over mimosas and eggs Benedict. But it was a start. Mia called that afternoon. She was crying before she even said hello. Hannah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. All those times mom and dad compared us all those family dinners where they acted like you didn't exist. I should have said something. Mia, you were a kid. We both were. But I'm not a kid anymore, and I've been part of the problem. I let them make me the golden child while you got nothing. I could hear the genuine pain in her voice. You know what's funny? I'm not angry anymore. I used to be furious, but building Medilink taught me something. The only person who needs to believe in you is you. Can we start over? She asked. As sisters, not as the success and the failure. We were never the success and the failure yet, I told her. We were just different. The real surprise was Ethan. 3 days later, he showed up at my office. I have a confession, he said. I've been thinking about our conversation at dinner, and I realized something. I've been talking to Hannah Carter, the CEO, for weeks, but I never really talked to Hannah Carter, the person. We ended up grabbing coffee and talking for 3 hours. Not about the acquisition, not about business, just about life. About growing up with impossible expectations, about finding your own path, about the weird coincidences that bring people together. He was right. We'd been negotiating a $250 million deal, but we'd never actually gotten to know each other. 6 months later, the acquisition closed. $215 million exactly as promised. Lily and I kept 40% of the company and stayed on to run it under the Horizon umbrella, but the real victory happened 2 weeks after that. I invited my family to dinner at my new condo in Cambridge. Nothing fancy, just pasta and wine and conversation. Dad asked about my plans for Medilink's expansion. Mom wanted to know about my thoughts on healthcare policy. Mia and Ethan debated the ethics of AI in medicine while I listened and occasionally jumped in with technical insights. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the invisible daughter. I wasn't the disappointment or the black sheep. I was just Hannah sitting at a table with people who finally saw me. As I watched my family laugh and argue and connect over dinner, I realized something important. Success isn't about being seen by other people. Success is knowing you were always worth seeing, even when they couldn't. Especially when they couldn't. Because the truth is, I didn't build the Medilink to prove anything to my family. I built it because hospitals needed it, because patients deserved better, because Lily and I saw a problem we could solve. The recognition was nice, but the real reward was never needing it in the first place. That's the thing about becoming invisible. Eventually, you learn to see yourself clearly, and once you do that, it doesn't matter if anyone else is looking. What do you think about Hannah's choice to stay silent for so long? Have you ever had to prove yourself to family who didn't believe in you? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.